The legal gaps in the protection of human rights of girl children continues to lead not only to exploitation of millions of girls and women, but also accelerates mass poverty, underdevelopment, conflicts, and the growth of extremism, which cost the country billions of dollars. On Law Weekly today, we discuss issues of forced child marriage and the impact on the girls and the country. I am Shola Shuyeli. The growth of extremism continues to cost the country loss of lives, property and money, mainly because extremists have a large pool of socially disadvantaged children and youth to recruit from. Many potential recruits are born into circumstances where girl children are forced into marriage, have multiple children who lack access to education and social protection, which then makes them vulnerable to conflict-related recruitment. It typically starts at an individual level.
Tell me about him. He will drink, he will smoke.
Take the case of Amina, born in Borno State but now lives in Lagos, where she engages in petty trading. Amina tells me that she was forced into child marriage at the age of 12. Today, Amina, aged 27, is in a fight for survival after preventing her husband from forcing their daughter into marriage with one of his friends.
The father wants my daughter to get married. She was 12 years old, and I told him no, she can't get married. But he said no, that she must get married. So I took my children, I ran out of the house, came to my mother's house. So he came there. He said he wants to take the children, and my mother was supporting, so I have to run out of the house.
Forced child marriage is a serious problem all over the world. A recent report by the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, shows that 15 million girls are forced into marriage before the age of 18. UNICEF also estimates that more than 650 million women alive today were also forced into marriage before the age of 18. UNICEF statistics also shows that Nigeria has the third highest absolute number of child brides in the world and the 11th highest prevalence rate of forced child marriages globally. Data analyst Rotimi Sankore speaks about the figures.
Percentage-wise, it doesn't seem very high at first. It's at 42-43%. But when you consider the overall number of adolescent girls in Nigeria in the context of Nigeria's population, then the absolute number of girls and women forced into child marriage is 20 million or more, which is very high. Today, when we say that roughly half the population is living in extreme poverty, a huge percentage of that half of the population are girls and women, and forced child marriage is a big cause of it, because when you exclude millions of girls from opportunity to education, it means that in terms of skills, jobs, aspiration, they're excluded. In that kind of circumstance, they're also being forced to have multiple children when they are children. So, say for instance, from the ages of 12, 13, 14, they could have 7, 8, 9 children by the time they are 30. That's a recipe for poverty as well. So it impacts on the economy.
Different reasons have been given for the prevalence of forced child marriages in Nigeria. This includes economic, religious, and cultural beliefs. But these reasons are not tenable, especially because of the dangers forced child marriages poses to the human rights of the girl child. There are also health issues, including adolescent pregnancies, sexually transmitted diseases, VVF, AIDS, maternal and child mortality, and even suicide. There are also economic implications. A 2017 World Bank study estimates that forced child marriages cost Nigeria $7.6 billion in lost earnings and productivity every year. A developmental economist, Tunji Andrews, says the implications are scary for the future.
Nigeria has, at this point, about 13 million out-of-school children. There are countries in the world that do not have up to 13 million people as an entire nation. So what that means is that this 13 million out-of-school children right now, today they're children, right? And that's what you have to think of, because as developmental economists, you have to think into the future. This is going to be 13 million adults in the future who do not have skills or literacy levels. That is 13 million burdens to the economy in the future. That is possibly another 13 million people added to the poverty loop. That is 13 million possible people who could go into crime. 13 million possible people who could go into banditry, add to all the other, insecurity issues we have.
The situation is bad, and many victims want out. One of them, Miriam from Jigawa State, was 14 when she was forced into marriage. After 5 children, she got the courage to leave her husband. She went back to school, and today she's a radio presenter who is doing well for herself. But tens of thousands are not as lucky.
And when you say we want a knowledge-based economy for the future, for girls that have had no opportunity for education, it's huge. Such people also, their children, are more likely not to have access to education. So there is a multiplier effect across generations, and that's very serious. You could then link that poverty with political stability and security. Because if you look, for instance, at the Northeast and the Northwest, you will find that the data is similar. At the height of the Boko Haram insurgency, about 83% of all men in Yobe did not have access to education. 63% in Borno. The percentages are higher for women in Yobe, 85%. For women in Borno, about 67%. So you can see how that also impacts on security, because you have millions of young girls and women having multiple children forced upon them. So one peasant farmer in that circumstance could have 4 girls forced into child marriage. He could then be responsible for 28 or 30 children. And in those circumstances of no access to education, poverty, it's easy to see how extremism or banditry can thrive. So it's not just developmental, it's also political, economic, and huge security implications.
The Child Rights Act of 2003, which is a domestication of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, was supposed to be the Nigerian answer to eradicating discrimination and exploitation of children. But some states are yet to domesticate the law. Senior human rights researcher Mausi Shegun speaks more about the law.
Under the Constitution, every level of government has the right and the power to make their own laws concerning children. Right now, we have 25 out of Nigeria's 36 states who have passed different versions of the child's rights law. But the good thing is that all of those states recognize that 18 is the age of majority. If I would ask you which states you think have not passed it, the 2 regions of Nigeria where the incidence of child marriage is prevalent is the 6 states in northwest Nigeria. Not one of them has passed it, and the 5 states in northeast Nigeria, not one of them have passed it. So 11 states in all have not passed it. So across the board, if you look at it generally, there is protection for children, including against child marriage. The Child Rights Act specifically prohibits marriage before the age of 18, or even betrothing, giving children out in an engagement or a promise of marriage before the age of 18. But the children in the northeast and the northwest are not captured or protected by these laws. There is no reason why there should be different standards and policies that affect children in the same country in different ways. We need to raise the standards in the northeast and the northwest, and a lot of it will be through education.
Ironically, just so that people don't make the mistake to assume that it's tied to religion or culture, there are countries that are officially Islamic that have legislated against forced child marriage, that have also legislated against polygamy. If you look at a country like Tunisia, for instance, or countries like Indonesia, so it's not necessarily tied to religion, it's people's interpretation of their religion that is really the problem. In the South, for instance, places like Bayelsa, first child marriage is very high as well. It's up to 50%. That means 1 in 2 girls. So it's not just a Northern or Muslim thing. Good Christian gentlemen also partake in this really negative culture. And if you look across Africa, you will also find that countries in Eastern, Southern Africa are also doing this. First child marriage provides legal cover for the exploitation, because the same man, if he grabs a 14-year-old girl off the streets and assaults her sexually, he's more likely to be arrested and prosecuted. But if the same man gathers 2, 3, 4 of such girl children and says he has, in quote, married them, he gets legal protection for that exploitation and abuse. So the laws are not okay at all. In fact, the laws give legal cover for that exploitation and abuse. So in terms of solutions, there are multiple ways to look at it. The first, of course, is to ensure that the girls have access to education. Access to education means that the likelihood of being forced into abuse and exploitation in the name of marriage reduces, because if you have 6 years of primary, 6 years of secondary, you are already late teen, post-teen. It also increases the chances that you will go to university or higher education, which then removes them from the social determinants that push them into first child marriage.
So the government itself needs to see that there's an education problem. The government needs to see there's a forced child marriage problem. The government needs to see that there's a developmental problem in Nigeria. If it doesn't see that, corporate bodies, individuals like you and I cannot plug in and help. You can only do so much. I can only do so much. You can only do so much. The corporates can only do so much. But the government has to create a framework that all of us can plug into. But the government itself needs to see that as a problem so that it can plug into fixing that problem.
The Emir of Kano also proffers some solutions.
If I were to advise governors in the Northwest and the Northeast, which goal should they focus on? It's one, and it's a subset of one. Just educate the girl child. No, the population in northern Nigeria today is probably 5 times what it was in 1960. In that period, you've had desertification. Lake Chad has lost its water resources. So the resources have shrunk, and the population has increased. You're not going to solve that by having the government spend money. You've got to address cultural attitudes to at what age do girls married? How many children do girls have? How many wives do men have? It's not money. It is not about money. Okay? Now, if you want to address those things, you also have to say, what is the quickest way to address them? You can spend your time convincing religious scholars and traditional rulers to go and be campaigning. But you don't preach to somebody who wants to marry a second wife or a third wife, and then have him listen to you. He loves the one he wants to marry her. Okay? However, if you educate the girls and make sure that they finish secondary school and have skills before they start getting married, they will not have 8 children. They will not accept domestic violence. And they are more likely to stop their husbands from having a second wife than if they didn't have education.
The evidence indicates that unless the federal and all state governments close the legal gaps and enforce protection of girl children, first child marriage will continue to contribute to poverty, underdevelopment, extremism, and conflict, which will in turn result in long-term instability and continue to cost the country billions of dollars annually.